Cops targeted a black teen but froze. When his FBI mother arrived, Marcus Harris was 17 years old, a quiet and bright student who lived in a small suburban town not far from Washington, D.C. He had always been the kind of kid teachers admired, focused, disciplined, and respectful. He loved books, spent his evenings studying, and dreamed of going to college to become an engineer. His mother, Danielle Harris, was his hero, though most of his classmates only knew her as the strict but loving parent who never missed a parent-teacher conference. Very few realized that she was also a respected FBI agent, someone who carried both authority and the quiet strength of a woman who had seen the best and worst of humanity. That evening, Marcus had stayed late with a few classmates at the library. He was preparing for an upcoming science competition and wanted to make sure his project presentation was perfect. As the night drew in, the streets were quieter than usual. The air was crisp, the sound of leaves crunching under his sneakers as he walked home. His maroon hoodie pulled up against the chill. The hoodie bore the bold white letters FBI, a gift his mother had given him after one of her work events. For Marcus, wearing it was not just about warmth. It was about pride, about feeling close to her even when she was away on long hours of duty. The road he walked on was dimly lit, with only a few flickering streetlights. He had his headphones draped around his neck, not playing music but ready in case he wanted company for the walk. He was only 3 blocks away from home when he saw the flash of red and blue lights in his peripheral vision. At first, he thought it must be a car accident or perhaps an emergency call. But when 2 police cruisers slowed down and pulled sharply to the curb beside him, his stomach tightened. "Hey, you stop right there," one of the officers shouted, stepping out of the car. Marcus froze. His pulse quickened. He had always been taught by his mother to stay calm in situations like this, to keep his hands visible, to speak clearly, and to never make sudden moves. But even with all her lessons echoing in his head, the reality of the moment made his palms sweat. I'm just walking home," Marcus said carefully, keeping his hands out of his pockets. The officers glanced at each other. One of them, a stocky man with a hard expression, moved closer. "You fit the description," he said curtly. "There's been a break-in nearby. Hooded sweatshirt, young male. You match." Marcus's voice trembled. "Sir, I was at the library. I live right down the street." The second officer, taller and younger, didn't respond to Marcus's words. Instead, he stepped behind him and said, "Hands behind your back." Marcus's heart raced. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her calm eyes whenever she gave him advice. He wanted to tell the officers they were making a mistake, but fear pressed against his chest like a weight. He complied, slowly moving his hands back, praying that nothing would escalate. "Why are you wearing that?" the stocky officer asked suddenly, tugging at the front of Marcus's hoodie. The bold FBI letters caught his attention. "It was a gift from my mom," Marcus replied softly. The officer gave a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Sure it was. You kids think it's funny to wear things like this, don't you? To play dress-up?" Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, sir. I'm telling the truth." By now, neighbors had started to notice. A curtain shifted in one of the nearby houses. A porch light flicked on across the street. But no one came outside. No one intervened. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of unseen eyes watching but not moving. The younger officer tightened his grip on Marcus's arm. "We'll sort this out at the station," he said, already pulling him toward the squad car. Panic surged through Marcus. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. He knew this was a mistake. But in that moment, his voice felt too small against the uniforms, the flashing lights, and the authority pressing in on him. His throat went dry and he swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. And then it happened. The stocky officer muttered words that sliced through Marcus like a blade. "You boys always screw up." The phrase carried years of prejudice in it, a dismissal that turned Marcus from a student with dreams into nothing more than a stereotype in the officer's eyes. It was not just about him. It was about every young black boy who had ever been told he was a problem before anyone knew his name. Marcus clenched his jaw, blinking back the sting of tears. He remembered his mother's teachings again. "Stay calm, Marcus. Do not fight. Do not argue. Survive the moment." But inside, he felt a storm of anger and helplessness. He had done everything right. He was respectful, compliant, honest, and still it was not enough. As they reached the back of the squad car, Marcus found his voice again. "Please, can I just call my mom? She'll tell you." "Enough!" The younger officer snapped, cutting him off. "You can explain later." Marcus's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. He could feel his legs trembling, his body screaming at him to run, but he knew he could not. Running would mean danger. Running would mean headlines. Running could mean never coming home. The world around him blurred with flashing lights and the murmurs of neighbors watching from their windows. He felt trapped in a nightmare he could not wake from. His mind repeated the same thought. This is not fair. I didn't do anything. Why don't they believe me? At that moment, as Marcus's hope began to slip, something unexpected cut through the night, the low, steady sound of an SUV approaching. Its headlights swept across the street, slowing as it neared the police cars. The vehicle pulled up sharply, the tires crunching against the gravel. Marcus's heart stopped. He recognized that car. Relief and fear collided in his chest. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Her hair was neatly tied back, her stride firm, her face unreadable but her presence commanding. She wore a dark jacket and in her hand, something glinted under the flashing police lights. Her badge. It was his mother, Special Agent Danielle Harris of the FBI. The moment she stepped onto the scene, the officers froze. Their grips on Marcus loosened ever so slightly, though they did not let go. The younger officer blinked, startled, while the stocky one stiffened, his expression faltering. For Marcus, it was like watching light break through heavy storm clouds. His mother had arrived. He was no longer alone. And though the night was far from over in that instant, Marcus knew one thing for certain. Everything was about to change. The silence that followed his mother's arrival was heavy, almost suffocating. For a brief second, Marcus thought the officers would let go of him immediately, but pride, authority, and the unwillingness to admit a mistake kept their hands gripping his arms tighter than ever. Danielle Harris did not rush toward them. She walked with measured steps, her eyes fixed on the officers as if she were calculating every detail of their faces, their movements, and even their thoughts. She knew better than anyone that moments like this could ignite into chaos if handled the wrong way. Her training told her to stay calm, but her heart as a mother was pounding violently in her chest. She saw her son's fear. She saw his trembling hands. And for a moment, the badge in her pocket meant nothing compared to the primal instinct to protect her child. Unhand him. Now. Her voice was low but sharp like a blade. It carried no hesitation, no nervousness. It was the voice of a woman who had led investigations, who had interrogated dangerous men, and who had spent years learning how to control a room without raising her tone. The officers froze. The stocky one, Officer Daniels, shifted uncomfortably. His partner, Officer Lewis, hesitated with his grip still on Marcus's arm. Their silence was broken only by the faint static of a police radio on Lewis's shoulder. Daniels finally spoke, his tone defensive. "Ma'am, this young man fits the description of a suspect in a burglary nearby. We're just doing our job." Danielle raised an eyebrow, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Your job?" she repeated as if testing the word on her tongue. "Your job is to serve and protect. Tell me, does this young man look like he's carrying stolen goods? Did you find anything on him? Or is the only reason you stopped him because of the color of his skin and the fact that he was wearing a hoodie?" Her words struck like lightning. Neighbors who had been watching silently leaned closer to their windows. A hush spread across the street, broken only by the far-off sound of crickets and the occasional bark of a restless dog. Daniels's jaw tightened. He hated being questioned, especially in public. He looked at Marcus, then back at Danielle, and tried to hold his ground. "We can't just ignore a possible match. He could be lying. He said he was at the library, but how do we know that's true?" Marcus wanted to scream. Wanted to tell them to check the cameras in the library, to ask the librarian, to see the book still sitting on the table with his notes. But he bit his lip and stayed quiet, just as his mother had taught him. Let the adult with authority handle it. Danielle stepped closer, her badge now fully visible as it hung from a chain around her neck. "You know who I am," she said firmly. "Special Agent Harris, Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's my son. And you are about to put yourself in a situation that will end your careers if you keep this up." Lewis's grip loosened almost instantly. His eyes flicked nervously between Danielle's badge and Marcus's frightened face. He realized the danger, not of Marcus, but of their own actions. Daniels, however, was slower to yield. "With all due respect, Agent Harris," he said, his tone colder now, "no one is above the law. Not even your son. If he's innocent, he has nothing to worry about. Danielle's eyes darkened. You're right. No one is above the law. That includes you. She stepped closer, so close that Daniels had no choice but to meet her gaze. And the law requires probable cause. Do you have it, or do you just have a bias? Her words hit him harder than he expected. For the first time, Daniels faltered. His partner finally released Marcus completely, stepping back, clearly shaken. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the officer's grip had pressed hard into his skin. Danielle gently placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder, the first sign of tenderness since she had arrived. Her voice softened for him alone. It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Those words nearly broke Marcus. He had held himself together through the entire ordeal, but hearing his mother's voice filled with both authority and love made the tears finally sting his eyes. He blinked them away quickly, not wanting the officers to see his weakness, but Danielle noticed. She always noticed. The tension still hung in the air. Daniels wasn't ready to let go, not just of Marcus, but of his pride. Agent Harris, he muttered, you have to understand, it's late and the report was clear. A young man in a hoodie was seen fleeing the area. We had to investigate. Danielle took a deep breath. She knew this kind of stubbornness. She had dealt with it in courtrooms, in interrogation rooms, even within her own bureau at times. But tonight it wasn't about policy or debate. Tonight it was about showing her son and this neighborhood that truth mattered. Investigate then, she said calmly. Check the library cameras. Speak to the staff. But don't you dare drag an innocent boy into the back of your car without evidence. Because that is not investigation, that's intimidation. Her words carried across the street. The neighbors, who had been silent, began murmuring now. Some nodded. A porch light clicked off as if someone satisfied returned inside. But Marcus knew they had all witnessed something important. They had seen what prejudice looked like in action, and what courage looked like when it confronted it. Daniels finally stepped back, clearly defeated, though his face burned with frustration. Fine, he muttered. But don't think this means enough. Danielle cut in, her voice firm once again. Go file your report, and when you do, remember the badge on your chest. It means something. Or at least it's supposed to. The officers lingered for a moment longer, then finally returned to their car. The flashing lights dimmed as the cruisers pulled away. The street, once filled with noise and tension, grew quiet again. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders sagging. He felt both relief and shame. Relief that it was over. Shame that it had happened at all. Danielle turned to him, brushing a hand against his cheek. Are you okay? She asked softly. Marcus nodded, but his voice betrayed him. I thought they were going to take me, Mom. I thought... His words trailed off, too heavy to finish. Danielle pulled him into her arms. I know you were scared. But listen to me, Marcus. You did everything right. You stayed calm, you didn't fight, you used your voice. That's strength. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Marcus buried his face in her shoulder, the smell of her jacket grounding him. For the first time that night, he felt safe. Truly safe. But inside, he also felt something else, a fire beginning to grow. He had been humiliated, dismissed, almost arrested for nothing. And though his mother had saved him, he knew he couldn't stay silent forever. As they walked home together, the quiet street echoing with each step, Marcus looked up at her and whispered, Mom, how many times has this happened to other kids who didn't have an FBI agent show up for them? Danielle's heart sank at the question. She knew the answer. She had seen the reports, heard the stories, even worked on cases that ended in tragedy. Too many, far too many. She tightened her grip on his shoulder and whispered back, That's why we fight, Marcus. That's why we never stop fighting. And in that moment, Marcus understood something he hadn't before. He was not just a victim of prejudice tonight. He was also a witness to the truth that silence allowed injustice to grow. And maybe, just maybe, his voice could be part of the change. The walk home felt endless that night, even though Marcus lived only a few blocks away. The air was cool, but his body was still burning with fear, anger, and humiliation. Every flashing light that had reflected on his skin, every hand that had grabbed his arm too tightly, every word that had been thrown at him. All of it stayed fresh in his mind like a wound that would not close. His legs carried him forward, but his thoughts were spinning in circles. Beside him, Danielle walked with the calm control of a trained professional, but inside, her heart was breaking. She had always known that her son would face challenges in life because of the color of his skin, but she had prayed it would not come so soon. Not like this. Not when he was still just a boy. She had taught him to be careful, to be respectful, to survive moments like this. But watching it unfold with her own eyes was a pain she had never truly prepared for. Marcus finally broke the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Mom, you didn't even hesitate. You just walked up to them like—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. Danielle glanced down at him and gave a small, tired smile. "Like I've been doing it my whole life?" He nodded. She let out a long breath. "Marcus, I've spent years in rooms with people who thought they could intimidate me. People with power, money, influence. I learned a long time ago that the only way to win in those moments is to know who you are and stand firm. Tonight they thought they had power over you. They thought they could define you. But they were wrong, and I had to remind them." Marcus's eyes lingered on her. He always admired his mother, but tonight admiration turned into awe. She had not raised her voice, had not screamed, had not begged. She had stood tall, spoken truth, and forced the officers to face their own actions. "Weren't you scared?" he asked suddenly. Danielle stopped walking for a moment. The streetlight cast a pale glow on her face, showing the softness in her eyes. "Of course I was scared," she admitted. "I wasn't scared of them. I was scared for you. I saw your face, your hands shaking, and I thought, what if I hadn't been there in time? What if tonight had ended differently? That's what scares me, not them. Never them." Marcus swallowed hard. He had never heard his mother speak like that before, with such raw honesty. He realized that beneath her badge and her calm authority was a mother who carried fears heavier than any case file she had ever worked on. They resumed walking, and as they reached their driveway, Marcus noticed movement across the street. A neighbor stood on the porch, pretending to adjust a potted plant but clearly watching them. Another house had its curtain slightly open, a shadow lingering just behind the glass. The whole neighborhood had seen the scene. They had watched him being grabbed, watched his mother stand up to the police, and watched the truth play out under the flashing lights. Everyone was watching. Marcus muttered bitterly, but no one came outside. No one said anything. Danielle turned to face him fully. "Marcus, people often freeze in moments like that. Fear makes them silent. Some don't want to get involved. Some convince themselves it's not their problem. But listen to me. You cannot let other people's silence define your worth. Do you understand?" He nodded slowly, though his chest still ached with the weight of it. Inside the house, Danielle finally let herself exhale deeply. She took off her jacket, laid her badge on the counter, and turned to her son. "Sit down," she said softly. "We need to talk about what just happened." Marcus sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared countless meals, laughter, and school project discussions. Tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like the place where he had to rebuild himself after being broken down by strangers. Danielle poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from him. Her voice was steady but warm. "Marcus, what you went through tonight was wrong. There's no excuse for it. You did nothing to deserve that. But you handled yourself the way I hoped you would. Calm, respectful, careful. You kept yourself safe." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I felt weak, Mom. Like no matter what I said, they weren't going to believe me. Like I didn't matter." Danielle reached across the table and took his hand. "You mattered to me. You mattered to your teachers, your friends, and everyone who knows the real you. And what you felt tonight, that sense of being powerless, that's not weakness, Marcus. That's what prejudice does. It makes good people feel small. But that doesn't mean you are small. Do you hear me?" His eyes filled with tears, and this time he didn't hold them back. He nodded, and she squeezed his hand gently. For a long moment the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of their breathing. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice shaky but determined. "How do you stay so strong, Mom? How do you stand there and not let them crush you?" Danielle leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant as if she were remembering years of moments that had tested her. "Because I know who I am," she said finally. "I know my value, my worth, and I refuse to let anyone take that away from me. And you, Marcus, you have to do the same. People will doubt you, dismiss you, judge you before they even know your name. But you cannot let them write your story. Only you can do that." Marcus listened intently, every word sinking deep into him. He realized that his mother's strength was not just about her badge or her authority. It came from knowing herself, from refusing to let the world define her. And maybe, just maybe, he could learn to do the same. Later that night, as Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he replayed everything in his head. The flashing lights, the officer's words, his mother's steady voice. The fire that had sparked in him earlier now burned brighter. He knew this was not just about him anymore. It was about every kid who had ever felt powerless, every voice that had ever been silenced. And as sleep finally pulled him under, Marcus whispered to himself, "They tried to break me, but I'm still here." Down the hall, Danielle stood quietly at his door, listening. She heard his words, and a small smile formed on her lips. She knew this was only the beginning of his journey, because tonight Marcus had witnessed prejudice in motion, but he had also witnessed the arrival of strength, his mother's, his own, and the kind of strength that could change the world if he chose to carry it forward. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the blinds, but neither Marcus nor his mother had truly rested. For Marcus, the night had been a restless swirl of dreams, flashing red and blue lights, the cold metal of imagined handcuffs, the echo of the officer's words repeating in his head like a curse. For Danielle, sleep was even harder to come by. She had spent hours sitting in her home office, staring at her badge on the desk. That badge had always represented honor, duty, and justice. But last night, justice had nearly been denied to her own child, and that reality gnawed at her soul. She had kept her composure on the street because composure was her weapon, but inside she was burning. When Marcus walked into the kitchen that morning, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, he found his mother already dressed in her crisp FBI jacket. She was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, but her posture was not relaxed. She was alert, her back straight, her face unreadable. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. She looked up, her expression softening at the sight of him. "Morning, baby. Did you get any sleep?" Marcus shook his head. "Not really, I kept..." Replaying it, Danielle reached out and gestured for him to sit. When he did, she placed her hand over his. "Marcus, what happened last night was not your fault. You need to hear me say that again and again until you believe it. Those men made a choice. They saw you not as Marcus Harris, the boy who loves science and works hard in school, but as a threat. That was their failure, not yours." Marcus nodded slowly, but his silence revealed that the wound was still raw. Danielle sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I'll be honest with you, son. Last night, standing there in front of those officers, I wanted to yell. I wanted to tear into them until they felt the same fear they put into you. That's the mother in me, the part of me that would burn the world down to protect you." She paused, her voice tightening, but the agent in me knew that wouldn't help. It would only escalate things. So I had to fight my fury and channel it into something stronger. Control. Marcus studied her face. "How do you do that? How do you keep it in?" Danielle gave a small, almost weary smile. "Because I've seen what happens when fury controls you. I've seen people lose their jobs, their freedom, their lives. Anger is fire, Marcus. It can warm a home or it can burn it down. You have to decide which one it's going to be." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with truth. But the fury she spoke of didn't vanish. It lived inside her, quiet but alive, as she dressed and prepared to leave for work later that morning. At the bureau, she carried herself as she always did, professional, focused, strong. But behind her eyes, there was a storm brewing. She knew what it was like to see injustice from a distance, through case files and reports, but seeing it touch her own child was different. It was personal now. That afternoon, Danielle sat in a meeting with her colleagues. They discussed ongoing cases, but her mind kept drifting back to Marcus's trembling voice. She saw the officers' faces in her mind, heard the dismissive tone, and replayed the moment when they grabbed him without cause. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm in front of her team. When the meeting ended, a colleague, Agent Morales, noticed her expression. "Everything okay, Harris?" Danielle hesitated, then gave a professional nod. "I'm fine," but she wasn't fine. She was furious. Later that evening, she returned home to find Marcus working quietly at the dining table, his books spread out. He was trying to dive into his studies, trying to cling to normalcy. But the look in his eyes told her he was still carrying the weight of the night before. She sat across from him. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. What happened yesterday isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of how you'll choose to carry yourself in the world." He looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, her eyes sharp but tender. "You have two choices. You can let this make you bitter. Let it convince you that the world will always see you as less. Or you can use it. You can take this pain, this anger, and turn it into fuel. For your studies, your future, your voice. That's how you fight without losing yourself. Marcus thought about her words for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, "I felt so small, Mom. Like I didn't matter." Danielle's chest tightened, but she reached out and held his hand firmly. "You matter more than you'll ever know. You matter to me, to your future, to every life you'll touch one day. And you proved last night that you are stronger than you think. You didn't fight back. You didn't run. You stood there even when you were terrified. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's courage." His eyes watered again, but this time there was a spark of pride in them too. In that moment, Danielle allowed herself to release a small piece of her fury. Not in anger, but in love. She hugged her son tightly, as if holding him could protect him from every injustice in the world. She knew she couldn't shield him from everything, but she could give him the tools to stand tall when the world tried to knock him down. Later that night, after Marcus went to bed, Danielle sat alone in the living room. The quiet of the house wrapped around her, but her mind was loud with thoughts. She picked up her badge again, turning it over in her hands. She whispered to herself, "I'll protect him, no matter what." And though her fury was still burning inside her, she knew it would not consume her. It would guide her. It would remind her every day why she wore the badge, why she fought for justice, and why she could never let prejudice win. For Marcus, the night before had been a scar. For Danielle, it had become a mission, because a mother's fury was not just about anger. It was about love powerful enough to confront the world and win. The days after the incident moved slowly, as if time itself wanted Marcus to reflect on every detail again and again. He could not walk down the same street without feeling the echo of flashing lights on his skin. Even simple things, hearing a car slow down behind him, seeing an officer pass by, brought a rush of unease to his chest. It was like carrying a shadow everywhere he went. But Danielle was not about to let her son sink into that shadow. She had lived too long knowing that the world could break you if you let it. She wanted Marcus to grow stronger, not weaker, from what he had experienced. One evening, she called him into the living room. The TV was off, the house quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Marcus sat down, still carrying the heaviness of the week. "Marcus," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I need to talk to you about something important. What happened to you was painful, but it's also a lesson. A lesson in power." Marcus frowned slightly. "Power? I didn't feel powerful at all, Mom. I felt helpless." Danielle nodded. "Exactly. That's the first thing I want you to understand. Power isn't always about physical strength or even about who has the badge or the uniform. Sometimes power is about presence, about knowing your worth so deeply that no one else can convince you otherwise." Marcus leaned back, unsure. "But they didn't see me like that. They didn't care who I was." His mother's gaze softened. "No, they didn't, but that doesn't erase who you are." "Marcus, listen to me carefully. You cannot let someone else's ignorance define your identity. They saw a stereotype. I see my son who works harder than anyone I know, who has dreams bigger than this town. Which one are you going to believe?" Her words struck him deeply. He thought about the way the officers had looked at him, the suspicion in their eyes. He also thought about the way his mother had looked at him on that same street, firm, protective, certain. There was power in her eyes, power that didn't need permission to exist. Danielle stood up and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled out a worn leather notebook and handed it to Marcus. "This belonged to your grandfather," she said quietly. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten notes, quotes, and reflections. Some were about family history, others about life lessons, but many were about strength and dignity. "Your grandfather taught me everything I know about standing tall," Danielle explained. "He lived through times when he was told he couldn't sit at certain counters, when people spat at him for the color of his skin. But he never bowed his head. He always said, 'Respect yourself first, because the world will try to take it away from you.'" Marcus flipped through the pages slowly, absorbing the weight of the words. One line stood out to him. "Silence in the face of injustice is not peace, it's surrender." He looked up at his mother. "Did he really write all this?" She nodded. "He wrote it for us, for his children, his grandchildren, for you, so that you'd know where you come from, and the kind of strength that's in your blood." Marcus felt a warmth in his chest. something stronger than the fear that had lingered all week. It was the sense of belonging, of connection to something bigger than himself. Danielle sat back down. Power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself, your voice, your actions, your response. The officers last week had authority, yes, but they didn't have power, Marcus. Not real power. Real power is in discipline, in knowledge, in integrity, and you showed that when you didn't fight back, when you held yourself steady even while they tried to tear you down. Marcus was quiet, but her words sank deep. He realized that maybe his strength that night had been invisible, even to himself. Maybe the fact that he had not exploded with rage, had not run, had not given them the excuse they wanted. That was power. The next day at school, Marcus carried his grandfather's notebook in his bag. He did not show it to anyone, but he felt its presence like armor. When one of his classmates joked casually about cops always picking up the bad kids, Marcus almost flinched. But then he reminded himself of his mother's words, "They don't define you." He stayed calm, focused on his studies, and walked away. That evening, Danielle asked him about his day. He hesitated, then told her about the comment. She nodded slowly. "And what did you do?" she asked. "I didn't say anything," Marcus admitted. "I just left." A smile curved her lips. "Good. Sometimes walking away is the loudest statement you can make. You chose dignity over anger. That's power." But Danielle also reminded him that silence was not always the answer. There will be times, Marcus, when you cannot stay quiet. Times when you have to speak, to stand, to let the world know you won't be ignored. That's power too. The wisdom is knowing which moment is which. Marcus absorbed every word. He began to realize that power was not just a single thing. It was layered, complicated, and personal. It was the courage to walk away when needed, and the courage to speak up when silence would mean surrender. That weekend, Danielle took him to the community center where she sometimes spoke to young people about justice and responsibility. She asked Marcus to sit in the back and listen. The room was filled with teenagers from the neighborhood, many of them carrying their own scars of discrimination. Danielle stood at the front, speaking with the same calm authority she had shown on the street that night. "Power," she told them, "is not about proving yourself to those who doubt you. It's about proving to yourself that you are enough, even when the world says otherwise. It's about choosing not to let anger eat you alive, but instead turning it into something that builds you." Marcus watched as the kids listened, their faces softening, their shoulders straightening. He realized then that his mother's words weren't just for him. They were for everyone who had ever felt powerless. After the talk, a boy about Marcus's age approached him quietly. "Hey, I saw what happened the other night. I live down the street. That was messed up. But the way your mom stood up to them, that was amazing." Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and humility. "Yeah," he said softly. She's strong," the boy nodded. "So are you." Most kids would have freaked out. But you didn't. You kept your cool. That takes guts. Marcus didn't know how to respond. For the first time, someone else saw his strength too. That night, as he lay in bed with his grandfather's notebook on his chest, Marcus whispered to himself, "Power is presence. Power is choice." And for the first time since that terrifying night, he believed he could carry it. The weekend came and went, but the shadow of that night lingered in Marcus's mind like an echo. He went about his days, school, homework, evenings at the kitchen table, but the memory of flashing lights and rough hands did not leave him. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear those words. "You boys always screw up." But now something was different. Alongside the fear lived a spark, an idea, a strength he had not noticed before. It came from his mother's words, from his grandfather's notebook, and from the realization that his story did not have to end in silence. On Monday morning, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. He stared at his reflection, the maroon hoodie folded neatly on the counter, the one that had drawn so much suspicion. For the first time, he wondered if he should wear it again. Was it a risk? Would people see him differently because of the bold FBI letters across the front? But then he remembered his mother's voice. Power is presence. Slowly, with steady hands, he pulled the hoodie over his head. When he looked back into the mirror, he no longer saw fear. He saw defiance, quiet but firm. He saw a boy who would not be defined by someone else's prejudice. At school, the day began like any other, but Marcus carried himself differently. He walked taller, his shoulders straighter, his eyes clearer. Some classmates whispered, some supportive, some curious, some mocking, but Marcus did not let their voices shake him. He had learned a lesson that weekend. The loudest noise was often the one inside your own head, and he was learning how to control it. That afternoon, Marcus's teacher, Mr. Carter, noticed his demeanor. After class, he called him over. "Marcus, you've been quieter than usual," Mr. Carter said gently. "Is everything okay?" Marcus hesitated. He had not told many people what had happened. He wasn't sure if he wanted to, but then he thought of his grandfather's words. Silence in the face of injustice is not peace, it's surrender. He took a deep breath. "Something happened last week. The police stopped me. They thought I was a suspect. They grabbed me and..." His voice cracked, but he pushed through. "They only let me go when my mom showed up." Mr. Carter's expression softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry you went through that, Marcus. But you know what? The way you're standing here right now telling me this, it shows strength. Not everyone can face something like that and speak about it." Marcus nodded quietly. The teacher's words stayed with him for the rest of the day. That evening, he found himself back at the kitchen table with his mother. She was reviewing case files, but she looked up when she saw him carrying the notebook again. "Reading Grandpa's words?" she asked with a smile. Marcus nodded. "It helps. It makes me feel like I'm not alone." Danielle leaned back in her chair. "You're never alone, Marcus. You have me, you have his words, and you have your own voice. One day you'll add your own lessons to that notebook for someone else to read." Her words made him pause. The thought of passing down his story, his strength to someone else. It planted a seed in his mind. Maybe his voice could matter more than he realized. That night, Marcus sat in his room writing in a journal for the first time. His words were raw, shaky, but honest. He wrote about the fear of that night, about the way the officers looked at him, about the moment his mother arrived. But he also wrote about what he learned, that he had stayed calm, that he had not lost himself, that he had survived. He wrote a line that would stay with him forever. "They tried to take my voice, but I found it louder in the silence." The next day at school, Marcus was asked to speak during an assembly for Black History Month. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking made him nervous, and sharing his personal story felt overwhelming. But then he remembered what his mother had told him. Sometimes silence is surrender. On the day of the assembly, Marcus stood on the stage in front of his peers. His hands shook at first, but as he looked into the crowd, he saw faces that reminded him of himself. Students who might one day face the same prejudice he had faced. His voice grew steadier with every word. "I want to tell you about something that happened to me," he began. "I was stopped by the police last week. They thought I was someone I wasn't. They didn't see me as a student or a son. They just saw a suspect. And in that moment, I felt powerless. But then my mother arrived, and she showed me something important. That power isn't about force. It's about knowing your worth. It's about standing tall even when the world tries to push you down." The room was silent, every student listening intently. Marcus felt the fire in his chest grow stronger. He was no longer just telling his story. He was giving his peers a message they could carry too. Sometimes people will judge you before you speak. Sometimes they'll try to make you believe you're less than who you are, but you can't let them write your story. Only you can do that. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Marcus stepped off the stage, his heart racing but his head held high. That night, when he told his mother about the speech, Danielle's eyes glistened with pride. "I knew you'd find your voice," she whispered. Marcus smiled, the weight on his shoulders lighter than it had been in days. For the first time, he didn't just feel like the boy who had been targeted. He felt like someone who had turned pain into purpose. As he lay in bed later, staring at the notebook on his nightstand, he whispered to himself, "I matter. My story matters." And deep down, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. His reflection was not just about the past, it was about shaping the future. Weeks passed since that night, but the memory never faded. Instead of weakening Marcus, it shaped him. He still walked through the same neighborhood, still wore his maroon hoodie with quiet pride, but now every step felt different. He no longer carried just the fear of what happened. He carried the lesson that came with it. He had seen prejudice face to face, but he had also seen the strength of standing tall against it. At first, Marcus thought his story would only matter to him and his mother. But as word spread through the school and community, more people began to notice him, not as the boy who was once targeted, but as the boy who spoke about it. After his speech at the assembly, teachers invited him to share his story with other students. His words began reaching not just his peers, but younger children too, kids who looked at him with wide eyes, searching for guidance. One afternoon, Marcus was asked to speak at a local youth center. The room was filled with teenagers from all walks of life, many of them carrying the same fears he had once carried silently. Marcus stood at the front, his hands no longer trembling like before. He looked at their faces, faces that mirrored uncertainty, doubt, and hope. "I want you to know something," Marcus began, his voice steady. "What happened to me could happen to any of us. But what matters isn't just the fear we feel in those moments. What matters is how we respond to it. Fear doesn't define us. Courage does." The room was silent. Some nodded. Others leaned forward, listening closely. Marcus continued. "I thought that night would break me. I thought I would always feel powerless. But my mom, she showed me something. She showed me that power is not about badges or uniforms. It's about dignity. It's about knowing who you are even when others don't." A boy in the back raised his hand. "But what if people never change how they see us?" Marcus paused, then smiled softly. "Then we change how we see ourselves. Because the truth is, if you believe in your own worth, no one can take it from you. And when you carry yourself with that kind of strength, people will notice. Maybe not right away. Maybe not everyone. But the right people will. And that's how change begins." When he finished speaking, applause filled the room. Some kids came up to thank him. Others asked questions, and a few even told their own stories of being judged unfairly. Marcus realized something powerful. His voice had opened a door. By sharing his truth, he had given others permission to share theirs. At home that evening, Danielle listened as Marcus told her about the youth center. She saw the light in his eyes, a light that reminded her of his grandfather's resilience and her own determination. She reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and said, "This is your purpose, Marcus. You took your pain and turned it into something that can change lives. That's the kind of power no one can take away from you." Marcus nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. For so long he had replayed that night as a wound. Now, he began to see it as the turning point of his life. Days later, Marcus was invited to share his story at a larger community event. The auditorium was packed with families, community leaders, and students. This time he did not feel nervous. He walked onto the stage wearing his maroon hoodie, the letters FBI bold on his chest, not as a reminder of what almost destroyed him, but as a symbol of what he had survived. He began with the story, describing the flashing lights, the officer's words, and the fear that gripped him. The crowd listened in silence, some with tears in their eyes. Then he shifted to the lesson. "What I learned is that power isn't about who can shout the loudest or push the hardest. Power is knowing who you are when the world tries to make you forget. Power is refusing to bow your head when someone else wants to make you feel small. Power is using your voice not just for yourself but for others who can't speak yet." The applause that followed was overwhelming, but Marcus did not stand on that stage for applause. He stood there because he knew someone in the crowd needed to hear those words. Maybe a younger kid who felt invisible. Maybe a parent who worried for their child. Maybe even an officer who needed to reflect on their choices. Whoever it was, Marcus wanted them to know that fear could be transformed into purpose. After the event, a little girl came up to him, no more than 10 years old. She looked at him shyly and said, "You're really brave. I want to be like you one day." Marcus knelt down, smiled, and replied, "You don't have to be like me. Just be yourself. That's brave enough." When he walked out of the auditorium that night, Marcus looked up at the sky. The stars were scattered across the darkness, steady and quiet. For the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. At home, Danielle watched her son with quiet pride. She had seen him at his lowest, trembling under flashing lights. Now she saw him rising higher than ever, his voice reaching beyond himself. She knew he would carry this lesson for the rest of his life, and that he would help others carry theirs too. In the quiet of his room, Marcus opened his grandfather's notebook again. But this time he didn't just read, he wrote. His pen scratched across the page as he added his own words alongside his grandfather's. "They tried to silence me, but instead they gave me a reason to speak. From pain I found purpose. From fear I found strength. And I will not stop until my story helps someone else believe in their own." He closed the notebook gently, feeling the weight of 3 generations inside it, his grandfather's lessons, his mother's courage, and now his own reflections. That night, as Marcus drifted to sleep, he realized something profound. Life would not always be fair. There would always be challenges, judgments, and battles. But as long as he carried his dignity, his courage, and his voice, he would never be powerless again. And in that moment, Marcus's story transformed forever. He was no longer just the boy who had been targeted. He was the boy who had taken his pain and turned it into purpose, the boy who would not let fear write his story. Because true power was not in what others tried to take from him. True power was in what he chose to give back to the world.